Basically, Vayetzei is the Parsha where Yaakov runs away to live in the house of Lavan. He's running away, number one, so Esav will not kill him. Number two, he's running away, he's traveling to find a wife to continue the Jewish family. Now, what is very interesting with Parshas Vayetzei, and it's rarity, it's not the only one, but it's a rarity. Most times when we start a Parsha, when you look in a Sefer Torah, Sefer Torah has many columns, and there are breaks in a Sefer Torah. And what happens is when you end one Parsha, let's say the Parsha ends in the middle of a line, then the rest of the line is blank, and you start the next Parsha with a new fresh line, because it's a new Parsha. And the truth of the matter is, what we call a Parsha really isn't the correct terminology for it. What we call Parshas Vayetzei really is called a Seder. It's a misnomer. We call it Parsha Shavua. It should be the Sidras HaShavua, but this will never be changed. But the Europeans, they call it, it's called being Maver Sedra. So when you read over the Parsha, they call it being Maver Sedra, not being Maver Parsha, because it really is a Seder. The word Parsha really is a more unique term. Parsha really means a chapter within the Seder. In other words, you have, this week is really Sidras Vayetzei. It's the Seder Vayetzei. And then if you look in the Torah, you look to see how many portions are divvied out with these breaks between one section and another. Now, it's hard, only when you have a Sefer Torah can you appreciate it when you see the gaps that are there. You know, for example, I don't know how well you can see, but I'm just taking an example of a tikkun, or there's an example of a chumash, where you see there's different sections, there's a break. Goes to the end, it's blank to the end, blank to the end. From one column, 3 parshios within a Seder. And that's very common. You could have different amounts. You could have 3 or 4 in a Parsha. You could have 12. It depends how many different topics. It's usually a new separate topic. But when you're starting a new Parsha, you've ended an old one, the old one ends where it ends. The rest of the line is left blank. And then we start fresh a new one. Now when we start a new one, that's called a Parsha Psucha. Parsha Ptucha. It's an open Parsha. It starts open. Now sometimes in the middle of a Parsha, you'll have a topic ends in the middle, and it's, so to speak, called a subtopic. Meaning to say, for example, just whipping out the Parshas Vayera just randomly, you'll notice over here where it stops, and there's a break of at least 8 letters, and it starts again right in the middle. So this is called a Parsha Stuma, a closed Parsha, because it's starting inside, it's not starting on a fresh new line. These are 2 types of Parsha, Parsha Stuma, Parsha Psucha. So usually when you're going to start a new Torah portion, you wouldn't start this way. You'd want to go up to the end of the line and start fresh, a brand new, fresh line. And that's how you'll find almost all the time through the Torah. When you start a new Sidra, what we call a Parsha, it starts on a fresh line. So now if you go to Parshas Vayetzei, which is this week's Parsha, I hope you can see, even if you don't see the words, but you see the idea. Here is the beginning of Parshas Vayetzei. The Parshas Vayetzei, which is, we therefore call a Parsha Stuma. And that is unusual. It's unusual for a Parsha to start that way. You follow? Do you understand what's going on over here? Usually, if this is from the Sefer Torah, you'd expect Vayetzei to start over here at the beginning of the next line. It's not. It's starting in the middle of a line, which is unusual to say the least. Also, if you go through this Parsha, you'll notice as I turn column by column, there are no breaks. Not a one. Just keeps going. Until we get to the new Parsha, still in Vayetzei, no breaks, until we get to the next Parsha, Vayishlach. Finally, Vayetzei ends, see? A new Parsha, Vayishlach, starts right there. So there's 2 unusual things over here. The Parsha Vayetzei is starting in the middle of a line. It's called the Parsha Stuma. And then the entire Torah portion doesn't have one break in the middle. And almost every other Parsha does. So why is that? So one of the commentaries, the Balei Tosfos, explains that the reason the Torah starts, this Parsha, the Sidra starts closed, is because Yaakov had to leave secretly at night so the Esav wouldn't catch him. So since he left kind of in a closed way, the Parsha is closed to reflect how he left. But that, is not a totally satisfying answer, because, to spoil the beautiful symmetry of the Torah just because he had to leave clandestinely is a bit of a pressed answer. So that's an overall question. Another question we have to discuss is when Yaakov begins to travel, he escapes from Esav, and he's about to daven mincha. He wants to daven mincha, and all of a sudden it says he goes to sleep. And the rabbis tell us that what happened was, instead of getting around to mincha, the sun set prematurely 2 hours. It set early 2 hours. And the rabbis, and that's why instead of davening mincha, he wound up davening Mariv. And then he also ended up going to sleep. So the rabbis asked, whatever happened to those 2 hours? It's like 2 hours were lost in the history of the world. The sun just set 2 hours early. So the rabbis say that next week's Parsha, before his confrontation with Esav, and after his confrontation with the angel, the sun rose up 2 hours early for him. So we have to understand, what does that mean? I mean, who cares? Why does Hashem make the sun set 2 hours early? Why does he make it rise 2 hours early the next time around? What's the understanding of that? But I think the most important question we have to analyze over here is that let's go over Yaakov's life a little bit. Yaakov's a nice young man. He spends his whole life learning Torah. He's a good boy. And last week's Parsha, when it was time to steal the blessings, he was 63 years old. So the first 63 years of his life was mamish beautiful. It was wonderful. He had a wonderful life. He was just sitting and learning Torah. You couldn't ask for more. And then his mother says, I want you to go and take the blessings. And ever since he took the blessings, life has just gone downhill. Ever since. Let me describe this a little bit for you. All right? Number one, he has to leave home and he has to go to Haran, the place where Lavan lives, which that itself is not a very attractive place to go. These are terrible people, as we've already discussed in the past. These are people that are crooks and criminals and scoundrels, and it's not exactly a nice place for a Jewish person to live. A. B, we know what happens. He works 7 years for Rachel, and then Lavan pulls the old switcheroo, and he puts Leah in the stead of Rachel, and notwithstanding all the efforts Yaakov made not to be fooled, he was. So that's a major thing. Read the story. Now think about it. Can you imagine you got married to somebody, and then you don't even realize that there was a switch going on, and then the next morning you find out this wasn't even your wife, or this is your wife, but not the one you planned on marrying? I think you would find that very difficult to deal with. Okay, we just hear the story from being kids. So they switched wives, big deal. What if it was you? Can you imagine, you want to get engaged, you get engaged to this woman, you love this woman, and then they say, we have a special custom in this city, we get married at night, and we turn off the lights, and we do it in the dark, etc., etc., and then you wind up the next morning, you find out that you're not even with the woman that you wanted to be with. That is extremely devastating. And then what happens, unusually, so what happens after Lavan says, well, that's the custom in our place, so he has to work another 7 years for Rachel, and he gets to marry Rachel, and, there's challenges in being married to two sisters. And then there's problems with Rachel not having children, that's the one he really loved, and then him having to marry two of the maids, and, all these things did not lead to what I would call a peaceful, tranquil home for Yaakov. Right? That's very, very difficult. all the challenges he has with Esav, with Lavan when he wants to leave, and he switches his wages 100 times, and there's always aggravations from this. And then when he finally leaves Lavan tries to kill him at the end of the Parsha, and Hashem warns him not to kill him. And then in next week's Parsha, out of the frying pan into the fire, Esav wants to come and he wants to kill him. He gets through that. Then the next story is his daughter Dinah gets raped. And then the next story, he finally gets home. When he finally gets home, his mother died before he got home. And then he finally wants to live a tranquil life. And then he has the 22 years of suffering where he thinks that Joseph's been killed. So to make a long story short, Yaakov's life just becomes miserable. Why? Because he listened to his mother. Okay? That's what it appears to be at this point. That's what it appears to be. So it just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right. Esav's the bum. Esav can do what he wants. He lives in Mount Seir. He has a wonderful life. And Yaakov, who's the obedient person, he listens to his mother, which obviously means listening to Hashem, and he has a really miserable life. So what are we to learn from that? And that, I think, is the most important lesson that we have to learn today. Another question: when Yaakov comes to Haran and he meets some of the shepherds, and he sees the shepherds are standing around, and he's wondering why they're standing around, why aren't they giving the sheep to drink? So they're told, well, we don't trust anybody here. So we put this big boulder on top of the well that nobody can pick up by themselves. As a matter of fact, you probably have to have 5 or 6 different shepherds wait till they all get together. They all will schlep the rock off of the well. We'll all watch everybody, make sure nobody drinks too much. And we're finished, we all schlep the rock back, a boulder, not a rock, a boulder on top of the well. And then when they say, and Rachel is coming, then all of a sudden when Rachel starts to come, Yaakov removes the rock from the well. And the rabbis say he removed it like a person would remove a cork from a bottle. In other words, he must have had superhuman strength. He could move a boulder that 6 people, 7 people would have to carry. Why is the Torah telling us that? And we'll find at the end of this week's Parsha, similarly, when Lavan catches up to him, and Lavan has to want to make a monument to recall the covenant that they're making, again the Torah records how Yaakov lifts a massive boulder, again by himself. So why do we need to be told about Yaakov's strength? Another question, I got about 8 or 9 questions. Another question is, why in general does Yaakov have to go through this whole complication of having more than one wife? And more than that, we know what happened. Lavan had one intention. He knew as long as Yaakov lives in town, things are good, they're blessed. 7 good years that he was there working for him. So what he has to figure a way to get him to stay another 7 years. I'm not going to get into all the details of how he did this. But right before the wedding, Lavan says to Rachel, take off your wedding gown and put it on Leah. Now, so she listens. And then they turn off all the lights. And by the way, parenthetically, this is the custom for the badekin that we have at every wedding, that every chassan has to veil his bride. Why? He better make sure he's got the right bride. It's from this incident that the first chassan got fooled, so we don't want any shenanigans. So make sure at the Kabbalah's party you go and you say, this is the one with the wedding gown, and there's not a lot of time to make any switches, and he knows that that's the one. But anyway, so, and then Yaakov, and then Rachel finds out what's happening. She's going to get switched. So now Rachel really didn't have to do anything. Because when Yaakov met Rachel, he already knew that she was his destined mate. And he already said, I know I'm going to marry you one day, and I know your father's a crook, so I'm telling you right now, whatever happens, under that chuppah, I'm going to ask you for a code word. And if you give me the code word, then I'll know it's you. And you don't tell the code word to anybody. So whoever he's going to put, it was the earliest security systems that were designed, right? The code word was the word Chana, which represents the 3 mitzvahs that a woman has to do. And that was the code word. So he figures everything's fine. So that answers why Yaakov, how he allowed himself to get fooled. He said, I got nothing, I don't care. He knew Lavan, when he turned off the lights, was going to try to do some shtick. He knew that. So I got no problem. 7 years ago, I told her the code. It's a security code. Nobody knows. She would never tell the code. So then under the chuppah, he says, okay, what's the code? And so Leah says, Chana. He says, oh, good. No problem. I'm okay. So what happened? Well, what happened is his plan almost worked, but the problem is Rachel felt so terrible for Leah that if Leah would go down, now Lavan didn't know about this code. So Lavan says, switch. So Leah would go down to the chuppah, and under the chuppah, Yaakov would say, no, what's the code? She'd go, what code? He says, you're an imposteress. Right? I guess imposter for a male, imposteress for a woman, right? So you're an imposteress. What's going on? And would Leah be embarrassed? And I say, whoa, what's going on? You're trying to do this. So Rachel, to avoid Leah's embarrassment, she gives her the code. She gives her the code. So I don't know about you, but I would imagine Rachel really wanted to marry Yaakov. So she had a problem. She wanted to marry Yaakov. She didn't want her sister to be embarrassed. Don't you think there'd be another way to deal with this? Couldn't she have stood up to her father and said, listen, Dad, this is not good. I'm not doing it. He says, oh, yes, you are. I'm taking the dress off you. Well, you can do what you want, but there's a special code, and I'm not going to tell you the code, so your whole thing's not going to work anyway. Why didn't she do that? Do you mean to say she didn't love Yaakov? She must have loved Yaakov. What was going through her mind? I understand she doesn't want her sister to be embarrassed. Are there other ways to avoid the sister being embarrassed and yet be married to Yaakov? That's a very important question. Anyway, what happens? Yaakov gets married to Leah instead of Rachel. The next morning, he wakes up and he sees another woman in his bed. So Rashi tells us the following interesting exchange. It's the first marital discussion between Yaakov and Leah. It goes something like this. Yaakov says, oh, I'm like, what are you doing here? You're the daughter of a swindler. Why did you cheat me? So she said to him, well, listen, didn't you cheat your father? When he asked you, are you Esav, my firstborn, when you came in to get the blessings? And you said, I am Esav, your firstborn. So, why are you telling me? Why did I cheat you? It's a good shidduch. You're a cheater, I'm a cheater. It's a good shidduch. So, I would hope this would not be the beginning of your marital discussions. It doesn't exactly sound like a nice way. Even if it was the wrong one, she should have said something else. Well, I'm sorry, I was told to do this. It was my father's idea, and I couldn't, it's all his fault. No, she just comes right back. She gives it right back. The way she gets it, she gives it right back. Doesn't seem to be the exchange of a tzaddik and a tzaddikis over here. Another question. So what happens? So he's now married to both. And the Torah says that Yaakov loved Rachel. And then the Torah says, and Hashem, but neither of them could have children initially. So Hashem opened up Leah's womb because Hashem saw that she was the hated one. Which would imply that Yaakov hated her. Now that doesn't make a lot of sense. Would Yaakov ever hate anybody? She's a righteous woman. And this is before, even with the switch, he wouldn't hate her. Doesn't seem to make sense. Okay, so what happens? So Leah has the first 4 children. Rachel doesn't have any children. Leah then says, listen, I need to have children. So Yaakov says, what can I do? So Leah says, okay, I'll tell you. Rachel says, I'll tell you what. Just like Sarah, I'll give you my maidservant, and you'll marry her, and you'll have kids from her. Maybe I'll be blessed to have kids. So the maidservant has 2 kids. Leah sees that she stopped giving birth after her 4, so she gives Yaakov her maidservant, and her maidservant has 2 more kids. Now we're up to 8. Score is 4, 2, 2, Rachel 0. Okay, now we come to a very apparently innocuous story. Very innocuous story. We are told that the firstborn Reuven went out into the fields during the harvest field time, and he picked some flowers called the dudaim. Dudaim. There's a discussion what they are, But basically, people could take from the flour, crush it up, and make it into a type of medicine that could help a woman who's having trouble having children, could help her to have children. Like a fertility drug. That's what it appeared to be. So Reuven, he brings the flowers to his mother Leah. He sees she hasn't had any kids for a little while. She stopped a little bit, so maybe this will help. And Rachel then sees that Leah has these flowers. So Rachel says, please give me these flowers. And Leah says, isn't it enough that you have my husband's love, but you want the flowers too? So Rachel says, if that's your problem, tonight is the night that Yaakov is supposed to lie with me in my tent. I will barter the flowers for a night of being in the tent. And he will go to your tent tonight, and I will have the flowers. And so it was. Yaakov comes from the field, and Leah says, I bought you for tonight, and you'll come to be with me. And indeed, that night, she conceived Leah. And she named the child Yisachar. And then she has another child, she calls him Zevulun. Now, if you're a person just reading this story, you say, what is going on over here? What is going on over here? Are Leah and Rachel so shallow to fight over flowers? Even if you're going to say it's a fertility drug, and they're being so easy with where Yaakov sleeps, and the whole discussion seems so crass, and not something you'd expect, righteous women to be speaking about. So it's a very difficult section. A. B, why even bother to tell the story? C, the Talmud in Sanhedrin tells us an interesting story about the wicked King Menashe. The wicked King Menashe, the Talmud tells us how wicked he was. And one of the things he does is he'd blaspheme God and say, this whole Torah is crazy, doesn't make any sense. And he goes to a certain section of the Torah saying, there's no way God wrote this. And if he did, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And he picks certain examples. For example, when the Torah gives us a listing of people who they married, it said that the daughter of Lotan was Timnah, and Timnah was a concubine of Eliphaz. He says, why does the Torah have to tell us who Eliphaz's concubines were? Exactly. And then he picks on this story over here. He says, tells me about Reuven picking flowers in the harvest time. Why does the Torah have to write it was in the harvest time? Oh yeah, a godly written book tells me all the details like a mystery novel. It's just say he went and picked some flowers. It's to say it's in the harvest time. This must mean that either God just is not a crazy God, or God never wrote this, but he was blaspheming the whole biblical system. So Gemara says it's a terrible thing. Then when Gemara's finished saying how terrible Menashe, say, by the way, why did the Torah write that he took it in the springtime? Why did he do it? So the Gemara says to teach you that righteous people are careful not to do anything that could be close to thievery. Because he went in the harvest time to pick the jasmine flowers. The jasmine flowers were not in season, wasn't that harvest, and he only took flowers that he knew were ownerless, and therefore he wouldn't steal. If at a different time of the year, those flowers could have been in somebody's property and you'd be taking somebody's property, but at this time of the year, anybody who wanted them would have taken them. By now, whoever didn't take them, they're ownerless, to show you that righteous people are careful not to take what isn't theirs. Nice, good. You have nowhere else in the Torah to teach me this lesson? You have to put it in this story? In other words, you want to tell me that righteous people are careful not to take what isn't theirs? There's a whole Torah you could put this lesson in. Why does the Torah find it necessary to put it into this little spot? And that really could have been Menashe's issue over here, and really needs a better answer. And the whole story, she didn't end up having any kids. So, God forbid, there are people who can't have children, and all kinds of things happen. It's not easy. Sometimes people spend a lot of money getting all kinds of medical treatments and this and that. So why is the Torah telling us this whole story? Nothing really came out of it. The Torah just could have said, and now Leah had 2 more kids. What do you have to do with this whole story of the deal that went on? I want the flowers and this and this and that. So what's the Torah teaching us? So you might say, well, I guess, to teach us that desperate people do desperate things. She was desperate to have a kid, and she was desperate. She was willing even to give up a night with Yaakov. But again, it doesn't really sound like something Rachel Imenu, our matriarch, would be doing. So we need to understand this story. And one last issue. There's a midrash on this. The midrash talks about business deals. And he says a good business deal is when both sides get something good on the swap. And to give an example, a good business deal was this one. This one. Where Leah gave up the flowers, and she got the night with Yaakov. She got 2 tribes that came out of it, and Rachel got the flowers. Now that was a good business deal, says the Medrash. I don't know about you, but I'm not such a good businessman, but I don't think that was a good deal. Do we see that Rachel had kids from this? No. What? Leah has the next 2 kids, and she has even a third. She has Bina. So it's at least a couple years until Rachel does get pregnant. So it didn't come from this. And more than this, the Medrash says because Rachel belittled sleeping with the tzaddik Yaakov, she was punished. That when it came time to decide who should be buried next to Yaakov in the patriarchal tomb in the Maras HaMachpelah, it is Leah and not Rachel. Because Rachel bartered it away, as it were. And therefore, when Rachel died in Beis Lechem on the way to Hebron, Hashem told Yaakov, you bury her in Beis Lechem and don't bury her in Hebron. So because she belittled a night with Yaakov, she did not, ultimately was not buried in the Maras HaMachpelah. Again, so to me it looked like a terrible business deal. Not only you didn't have kids, but you don't even get to be buried with Yaakov. And again, it seems extremely tragic. Okay, enough questions. That's about a half an hour of questions. And now we can take a look at this nice chart over here. Those of you on Kosher Tube, there's a look at the chart. Maybe take a little picture of it so you'll have it. I don't know if it's in focus. But, so this chart, Yehudis Adams made this for me many years ago. And it's a good little chart. And with this chart, you really understand the whole story. And there should be more on the Bima. If you don't have it, there should be more copies on the Bima. Let's look at the chart, and you see 2 little clouds at the top. Really should have been trees, but it doesn't work graphically. So let's go back to the beginning of creation and see how this all fits into the much broader context of the history of the world and the history of the Jewish people. Hashem put Adam in the Garden of Eden, and he put 2 trees there. The Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life, and the Eitz Hadas Bein Tov L'Ra, and the tree of knowledge between good and evil. Well, we know that Adam was commanded not to eat from the tree of knowledge. Okay, very good. So I understand why he put that tree in there. But why did God put in the tree of Eitz HaChaim? Why did he put in the Eitz HaChaim? He says he put in a tree of life. So, okay, you got the tree of life. You got the tree of the forbidden fruit you shouldn't eat. So it's okay. So the tree of good and evil, you're not supposed to eat it. Fine. What do you need the tree of life for? So the Hasidic masters give the following interpretation. They say these trees represent much, much more than just eating trees. What they really represent is the dual approach that a human being must take in order to live in this world in a meaningful way. And the general terms that are used are sur meira, stay away from evil. It's all on the chart. You follow the chart down. And aseh tov, and do good. In life, it's a combination of 2 things. And that's really where we get the idea of mitzvahs aseh, positive mitzvahs, and mitzvahs lo aseh, negative mitzvahs. Hashem says, do these things will bring you closer to me. Avoid those things because those things will distance you from me. That's really what life is all about. Make sure you do the right things at the right time and stay away from the wrong things. So the Eitz HaChaim represented doing what is good and proper. Hashem says, this I want you to eat. This is a tree of life. That means it's a mitzvah to eat from this tree. You will acknowledge how wonderful I am, how kind I am, that whatever that tree of knowledge was, it wasn't a simple tree. But whatever it was, by eating that and consuming it and appreciating it comes from me, that's a good thing for you to do. On the other hand, that other tree, stay away from it. Whatever you think is good, it may even look appealing to you, but I'm telling you, don't take it. It may look even better tasting than the tree of life, but I don't want you to take that one. You cannot take that one. And if you can do that, you're going to be a wonderful person, Adam. And if he would have listened, he would have brought the complete rectification of the world instantly. Now, these two behaviors are based on two qualities that we've already discussed a couple of weeks ago. The quality of chesed, of kindness, and the quality of gvura, which is control. We said there's the 7 spheres, the 7 lower spheres of how to act. And the top 2 are chesed and gvura. Chesed means a positive act, doing things out of love and kindness. And generally, that is the guideline for all positive mitzvahs. Every time you do a mitzvah, it should be out of love. You shouldn't do mitzvahs so you don't have to do it. Because you want it. You love Hashem and you love mankind. And when you do mitzvahs, it makes the world a better place. So doing good is really an act of chesed. Doing mitzvahs is an act of chesed. On the other hand, not doing bad, self-control, we call that gvura. Self-control, where you avoid doing things that you should not do. This is what it means to be a wholesome human being. You have to use the attribute of kindness to do things in a positive way in this world. You have to exercise the attribute of gvura, of self-control, to avoid the negative things in this world. Had Adam not eaten from the forbidden fruit, then he would have been fine to go ahead and eat the tree of life. And many suggest he had to not eat that tree for a couple hours till Shabbos, and then Shabbos eat the tree of life, and the world would have been perfected. However, we know it didn't work out that way. As the chart tells us, Adam fails the test. He cannot resist. So since he cannot resist, then God says, I got to take him out, and I got to take him out before he eats the tree of life. Now, I don't have a lot of time to get into this point, but the truth of the matter is, if a person cannot resist and does averos, then they're not really able to do mitzvahs to connect to Hashem either. Because those mitzvahs will be corrupted. And therefore, the person who cannot self-control really is not in a position to do good. Because, remember, doing good means, I love you, and that's why I do it. Right? But if you already hurt somebody by not listening to them, can you imagine if a husband, for example, does something bad? What did he do something bad? He insulted his wife. And then, on the same token, he gives her a box of chocolates as a gift. So you think that box of chocolates is going to be taken in a spirit of love? Or better yet, was it given in a spirit of love? Can't be, because if he loved this woman, he wouldn't have insulted her. You can't do positive things if you're carrying negatives. And if you're doing the positives, and it's obviously only for self-serving motives, that could be even more destructive than the negative that you did. So therefore, once Adam couldn't resist the negative, Hashem said, I'm not even going to let you get into the positives. Get out of the garden, finish. And that was the fall of mankind. Well, 20 generations continue. Finally, Avram Avinu comes into the world, and Avram corrects the flaw, creates the ability of Asay Tov to do good. He establishes the trait of kindness in the world. Amazing. Step 1. Very good. Has a child, Yitzchak, and Yitzchak now works on the trait of gvura, of self-control. Very good. And they each have wives to help them with this. Sarah helps Avram, as we discussed a couple weeks ago. If you recall, Sarah was the balance to Avram's chesed, or the counterbalance, and Rivka is the counterbalance to Yitzchak, who establishes this. Very good. Now, what still has to happen? Well, if you look at the spheros, and I don't have time to give you a whole class in spheros, but really after chesed, there are, after the 3 top spheros of Keser, Chochmah, and Bina, are then 6 more spheros, 6 more characteristic traits, which are called the 6 edges of Tiferes. They're called the 6 edges of Tiferes. It's working down the line, Chesed through Yesod, the 6 characteristics. You don't have to know what they are. Different characteristics that can be developed. So what would still have to happen? What still has to happen in God's plan, and originally this was supposed to happen with Yitzchak and Rivka, but for reasons that I'm not going to get into now, it doesn't. So now what happens is Rivka and Yitzchak have two children, Esav and Yaakov. Esav and Yaakov. So now what becomes the plan? The plan becomes like this, that there are supposed to be 4 patriarchs. Avram, Yitzchak, Esav, and Yaakov. That's the game plan. What's Esav's job? Esav's job is to follow the footsteps of his father Yitzchak, and Yaakov's job is to follow the footsteps of his grandfather Avram. And where Yaakov will continue to develop the attribute of kindness, being the do-gooder, asay tov, Esav will continue in the father's footsteps of learning self-control. We talked a bit about this in the Shabbos alternative class. Okay, now what would have happened if things worked out well? There's supposed to be 12 tribes. And what should have happened is that now each one of these children, Yaakov should have had 6 children, Esav should have had 6 children, and each one would have perfected those 6 edges of Tiferes, those next 6 qualities that go down the line, and they have to be perfected in 2 ways. Yaakov would have 6 boys, each one taking one characteristic and developing it in a positive way, in how to do the characteristic. And Esav's 6 sons would work on each characteristic of how to have self-control and not to abuse the characteristic. And that's how they would synthesize. It would have been a wonderful nationhood of Esav and Yaakov. And as we know, the pasuk in Tehillim says, Sur meira va'asei tov, resist the evil and then do the good. And now we're coming to the final formation of Jewish people. So Esav is the eldest. So he starts Sur Meirav, teaching us how to resist evil, and he'll have 6 children who know how to control themselves in using these 6 attributes. And then Yaakov will come along and teach us how to use them in a positive way through his 6 children. And that would have been the perfected Jewish nation. That was the plan. However, as we know, Esav fails miserably. Esav, and there's a lot to be gained. It's a much harder road to be successful in the Sur Meirah, stay away from evil, as it is to be in the do-good area. So, basically, when Yaakov bought the birthright in last week's Parsha, effectively, Esav was saying, this whole leadership business isn't for me. And Esav was a total failure. Now, here is an important point that becomes the key to understanding everything that's going to happen in this week's Parsha and everything that happens in Yaakov's life, and this becomes the most important message for us to internalize for ourselves. Well, if Esav is not doing the job, what's going to happen to the future of the Jewish people? Well, Yaakov could say, well, listen, I got my job. I'm the man who does good. I'm the man who preaches chesed. I'm doing my job. Let me get married. I'll have my 6 kids, and I'll perfect everything that I have to do. What would that do for the Jewish people? Would not be good. Remember what we learned 2 weeks ago about, it's not good for man to live alone. There's got to be a balance. The Jewish people would have been an unbalanced people. They would have been more like Canaanites, because you needed that counterbalance of the Sur Meirah to avoid evil, to have self-control, to have gvura. So this is what the rabbis tell us, and this is the most profound message, and that's what I put by line of what happens. If a person does not address himself to his own purpose and mission in life, then God has to find somebody else who will pick up that mission. And the one that God finds, and the one that God offers it to, and that person does that, that other person not only will have found his own purpose in his life and be rewarded for his own purpose, he picks up an extra mission. He picks up an extra purpose, and he gains even more by being a greater human being, by accomplishing more in his life. Now this is a very, very, what shall we say, difficult concept, and it has a lot of irony to it. Because the one who gives up on his mission, takes the easy way out, pretty much enjoys the rest of his life. He gets what he wants. He's had a great life. He never had a day that didn't have what he wanted. He would kill people, pillage people, rape people, enjoy it. That's the life he wanted. That's the life he had. But at the end of the day, when Esav died, that was the end of Esav. So short-term gain, long-term loss. Yaakov, on the other hand, if Esav is not doing his mission, so Rivka, when she understood that Yaakov, that Yitzchak wanted to give Esav the brachas, she says, Esav's not worthy of these brachas. Esav's not worthy of the blessings. Yaakov's going to give him the blessing to be strong in self-control. He says, I can't give you that blessing. He can't get it. Yaakov, you have to take that blessing. Now when Yaakov resisted, he said, I can't do that. That's not who I am. I'm the man who does good. I'm not the man who's going to take over this second dimension. Rivka said, you have to. Because if you don't, there'll be no Jewish people. And if you don't do anything, and Esav gets this blessing, that's going to be terrible for the Jewish people. So you've got to get that blessing. But Yaakov says, but that's not me. He says, don't worry, look, I'm going to put on his sheepskins. I'm going to put all his clothing. And you're going to start learning to be like Esav. And this is the change that happens in Yaakov's life. For the first 63 years in his life, he developed one type of personality. But now for the next, we could suggest almost another 63 years. Maybe a little less, but a big chunk of his life, he now has to work on developing the Esav personality that never got developed. And this is an enormous task, because it's not just an extra job, it's a job that requires all the opposite characteristics than the one he has to do the job that he is doing. To be the kind person, the person of kindness and the do-gooder is one personality type. And that's why God originally said it should be two people. Because one person cannot do both jobs. That's why I don't think we appreciate the greatness of Yaakov. He's called the choice of the chariot. Of the three patriarchs, he's hands down called the greatest. Not to take away from Avram, not to take away from Yitzchak, but Avram's time and Yitzchak's time did not demand anybody taking a dual role. But Yaakov had to, or there'd be no continuation of the Jewish people. So now Yaakov has his first test. Can you go and get that blessing from your father without being detected? That's your first test at going against evil. Because who's the evil? Esav. You got to go, and it's going to take self-control. And therefore, when Yitzchak says, who are you? He says, it is I, Esav, your firstborn. Was he lying? He wasn't lying, because now he was taking over Esav's job. Remember, a name means your purpose. So I have a middle name now. It's called Yaakov Esav. Because I have to do it. I wasn't lying. Esav's not worthy. He's not doing the job. I'm doing Esav's job. So now I am Esav. Now, where is Yaakov going to train to become the master of self-control and to stay away from evil? Where's he going to train? In Yitzchak's house? Everybody's righteous. So it's only logical he has to go to Lavan. Because Lavan is a crook, a snake in the grass. It's the worst type of person. You have to learn to live with this guy, defeat this guy, and walk out with a family and everything else. Remember, the Jewish people need two people. We need the rabbi who sits and learns, and you need the soldier who's going to kill all the Arabs. You need to have both. The tzaddik who sits and learns, he's got to be focused on one thing. But how about all those Canaanites and all these terrible people who want to destroy us? We have to push that evil away. Who want to bring all kinds of evil influence. We've got to push that all away. So now if you look at the beginning, what is this Parsha called? What's the name of this Parsha? Vayetzei. What does Vayetzei mean? And he went out. What does it mean? He really went out from where? Right? What do the first words say? Vayetzei Yaakov mi Beersheva vayelech Harana. He left Beersheva. He left the place where he was always trained to be a man of kindness, a man of doing good. He had to leave that life and now go to Haran, where he'd have to learn to become the new prototype of staying away from evil. and fighting evil and learning Gvura. So he had to go out of his personality. And from that time on, so it's not that Yaakov is punished for taking away Esau's blessing, but all the trials and tribulations he goes through for the rest of his life are all the obstacle course he has to go through in order to develop this new personality of being able to resist evils. And therefore all the challenges were just challenges to become the next level person that he has to be. And see how this all fits in. So when he comes to Haran, so now you understand why the very first thing that happens when he comes to Haran, what's the very first thing that happens? He meets Rachel. Now, Yaakov, now remember, this is what he's got to do. Now, remember, whenever you got to do a new job, you're not totally in sync with it right away. And a lot of times, your parents tell you to do something that you're really not so excited. You do it, but you're not totally focused in that area. It will take time for Yaakov to understand what's going on. And, sometimes things are happening and it's not in so many words. It's not like Rivka sat him down and explained to him the whole, like she says, you just got to take it, you got to do this. And he sees, taking it, got to do it, my brother wants to kill me, I got to run away. He says, that doesn't make sense. I want to stay here in Eretz Yisrael. I listen to my mother and I got to run away. I got to go to this place, Haran. Yaakov did not want to go to Haran. This was not a happy thing for him. So Hashem kind of reflects how Yaakov's feeling, and he makes the sun go down 2 hours early. As if to show that Yaakov's in the dark. He's lost. He doesn't know, he doesn't have a handle on himself. Imagine, go into Yerushalayim, go to the Mir Yeshiva, take a nice yeshiva bacher, a kollel guy, who's been sitting there for 25 years in Gemara, pluck him right out, and now have him work for the Israeli Secret Service. He's in the wrong clothes. He's very uncomfortable. He says, I don't know why I have to do this. You have stories of great Hasidic Rebbes who somehow end up in jail and they didn't do any sins. What did Hashem put me in here for? So Yaakov kind of feels like he's in the dark. The sun set early for him. He doesn't understand what's going on. This doesn't make any sense. I was learning Torah all my life. I should be sitting in Yeshiva Shem Ve'er. When I find myself on the way to Haran, I got to learn to now. I have to be a shepherd. I have to be a businessman. I have to be a sneak and a crook. It's not for me. That's why Hashem has to come to him in a dream and encourage him. He says, no, this is okay. Just keep it up. The dream's another class for another time. So now he goes. So he goes, and now remember, Yaakov inherently is a man of kindness. So now, who is he going to naturally feel an affinity towards? Rachel or Leah? Rachel. Because as we said before, for your media you need the opposite person to develop it. And Rachel is that opposite person. She is the Gvura. For very simple fact, she's the shepherdess and not Leah. So instantly, he knows she's my Bashert, which she is. But then Hashem hints to him and says, but all of a sudden Yaakov comes over to this boulder. Yaakov was not a very strong man. All of a sudden, boop, he picks the rock off. Well, why did God give him that strength to do that? Because God is hinting to say, listen, you remember you've got a new mission. It's not just Rachel. God gives you subtle hints. The question is, do you pick up on those hints? He says, you are going to be developing a new attribute. You're going to need a lot of strength for your job. And all of a sudden, Yaakov sees he's got superhuman strength. Doesn't quite get it yet. But God's dropping him lots of hints. Do you understand? And you need that strength to be able to bash heads with the evil people in this world and to protect that which is pure. So Hashem is kind of already hinting at what's going to happen over here. Okay. Now the Torah then tells us, when Yaakov is asked, who do you want to marry? The Torah tells us something that doesn't seem to be so important. It says, well, Leah's eyes were really weak and they didn't look very pretty. Well, Rachel was beautiful. Why did the Torah tell us that? So Rashi says, this is when we talk negatively about a person, ugly eyes. So the rabbis tell us that Leah's eyes became ugly because she cried a lot. Why did she cry a lot? Because everybody knew that the talk of the town was that the older son between Esav and Yaakov, which was Esav, was destined to marry the older daughter, which was Leah. and the youngest son would marry the youngest daughter, and Yaakov would marry Rachel. Now that would have made a lot of sense had Esav stuck to his game plan, and Esav would have developed Gevurah, control. He would have needed a woman who's more steeped in chesed, which was Leah. And Yaakov was more steeped in chesed, needs a balance for him, Gevurah, which would have been Rachel. And that's how the Shidduchim were supposed to play itself out. The problem is, Esav became a Rasha. Leah asked people, "Oh, how's my Basher doing? Any word?" People would try, like, "Any word about Esav? Can you tell me what this Bacher is like?" You don't want anything about him. Hey, we heard he just murdered these people. He raped these women. He stole this. She goes, "I get involved. I'm married to this guy." So she cries and cries and stops and says, "Hashem," and says, "I don't want to be with this guy." She cried so much her eyes became very not pretty. That's why the Torah is telling us this. Okay. So certainly she had a tremendous sitkus that she didn't want to be involved with this kind of a fellow. So now, it's time to get married. So, I can figure everything's good. I'm going to marry Rachel. That's going to be fine. And Yaakov, again, he's kind of figuring, I'm the Asay Tov guy. I'm the good guy. I'm still not totally sure why I'm here, but I got to do this. And then comes along Lavan, and he makes the switch. When Lavan makes the switch, Rachel is very clever. She is the clever one of the bunch. The most clever one of the bunch. She says, if Hashem is making this happen, there must be a reason for this. Hashem is putting me in a very critical situation. This is where the Bini Yisera, the deeper understanding that the woman has, comes into play. And she figures, Yaakov's here, I don't know what's going on with Esav. Esav's a bum. So she is ready much quicker than Yaakov to understand what's going on over here. And Yaakov's over here, he wants to marry me, and that would make sense. But now all of a sudden Lavan wants to switch it. So she figures and says, switching. I think God is giving me a very important message over here. A very important message. Yaakov really, as I see him in the last few years, he's developing this Esav personality. And if he is developing this Esav personality, he needs a wife that can develop that part of the personality. And that's not my qualifications. My qualifications is to develop the chesed personality, because I'm the counterbalance to that. Well, my sister is more suitable for him. And when she sees Lavan saying that you make the switch, she thinks, you know what? The truth is, there'd be no other way to do this than in this fashion. What do you mean? Well, what if Rachel would have approached Yaakov and say, I think you should marry Leah first? He said, what are you talking about? Yeah, I think you should marry both of us. Remember, Yaakov's the man of truth. The man of truth who has to learn more about truth than what he knows about truth. He says, well, I'm not going to marry her. How can I marry her? That means I wouldn't marry you. You marry both of us. What do you mean marry both of you? He says, what does a man marry two sisters? Because we know the rabbis, we were told that the patriarchs kept the whole Torah before it was given. And Torah doesn't allow you to marry two women. He says, I can't marry two women. Well, I think you'd have to make an exception in this case. What? I said, no, I'm only going to marry one. If she goes head on with Yaakov, he would not have agreed. So I'm marrying you, and that's it. End of discussion. But Rachel had the Bini Yisrael. She had the deeper understanding. She said, no. You're doing two roles. You're doing two missions. Two missions, you've got to have two wives. This is an exceptional situation. When everything is normal and proper, we follow everything in the Torah. Remember, before it was given, so you could bend the rules a little. So, it's meant for your good even before the Torah. But listen, Esav didn't do his job. Yaakov, you got to take on two jobs. Two jobs, you need to have two wives. But he couldn't hear it. And Rachel knew he wouldn't be able to hear it. So she played along, meaning to say, this Hashem is guiding the events, and this will all be good. That shows the tremendous character that Rachel has. It's not a question just of the sister not being embarrassed. As we ask them again, well, just blow the whistle on the story. Just, stop at the beginning. No, she realized if this is Lavan's intention, she said, this is probably the hand of Hashem at work. And the truth is, the best thing for Yaakov to have two wives. Now, which one would he have to marry first? Well, we start with Sur Meirah and then Asay Tov. So he's got to work the two of them together. He's got to have Sur Meirah first. So he's got to develop the Esav personality. He's got to marry Leah first. And then he'll marry me afterwards. And I'll help him with the Asay Tov part. And so it was. Now, Rachel and Leah, they understand where Yaakov should be. And when Rachel told Leah, I'm telling you the code, and she probably said, and this is the best way to be, because you got to work on his other personality. So now we understand when Yaakov gets up in the morning and he finds Leah, so what did he say? Your father was a trickster, so are you. Right? What does she answer? But didn't you fool your father and take the blessings? What was she answering? It wasn't tit for tat. She's saying, don't you realize what your mission is? When you took the blessings, you were taking on the mission of Exile. And don't you understand how I'm the wife that will help you develop that mission? And then Yaakov is beginning to get the idea. Now you can understand that when Yaakov finds out he was fooled, he doesn't annul the marriage. He doesn't punch Lavan in the face. He doesn't take Rachel and leave. He realizes, you know what? I've got to develop both. And this explains now why the Torah says he loved Rachel, and it says, and Leah was the hated one. What does it mean Leah was the hated one? So Ramban explains a new definition of hatred. It wasn't an active hatred. He says hatred can be the following. If you really relate to one person a lot, to the extent that you ignore another person or treat them a little bit less, the other person feels hatred, even though you weren't sending messages of hatred. You know, an overt case would be, there's two people in the room, you go to one person in front of them and say, oh, I'm so glad to see you, it has been so long, I'm so happy to hear you, oh, hi George, and you continue talking to the other guy. And I said, well, you must hate me. Well, I didn't say I hated him. Yeah, but you're not giving me any attention. So the Ramban says, that's hatred. Even though we don't plan on hating the person, we're not hating them, but they feel hated. So that's the same thing. Yaakov really, he still always felt closer to Rachel because that was he felt his main mission. So he had trouble in the beginning relating with Leah. Even though he was told this, but he's still struggling with it. He struggles with it for a long time. So he didn't give her the same affection because she wasn't the one he was really always destined to be with. This was like an afterthought. So as an afterthought, okay, I got to do it, all right, but he was struggling with it, and therefore the full love wasn't there. Okay, now, what does happen now is very interesting. You'll notice that all the children that Yaakov has from Leah would have been the children that Esav should have had with Leah. Meaning to say that Esav was what? He's the man of hands. Yadayim b'dei Esav. The man who has to resist evil is a man of hands. The guy who does kindness is called Yaakov, is a man of voice. If you look, I don't have time to go through all of them. You go through Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. Go through. These are all people who showed in their personalities what a child of Esav in the right way would have been. Just to get a couple of quick examples. She named the first child Reuven, which is Ru'u Bain. Look, Hashem saw I was suffering and I have a son. But Rashi brings another pshat, says, look at the difference between my firstborn and my father-in-law's firstborn. My father-in-law's firstborn, Esav, wants to kill his brother. My firstborn, when he finds out that Yosef wants to be the leader, he won't try to kill him. So she's contrasting Reuven to Esav. And the truth is, Reuven did a lot of things with his hands. Next week's Parsha, when Rachel dies and Yaakov puts his bed into the tent of Rachel's maidservant, Reuven says, that's a chutz b'nei mother. He takes the bed and moves it into Leah's tent. He was wrong for what he did, but always he was using his hands. He was doing an Esav type of act. And he meant well, although he made a mistake. And we'll see there's other things in a minute we will see as well. But you see that he's doing his hands. Yaakov, when he wants to give him the blessings, he says, I'm not giving you the blessings. You were supposed to have Yeser Seis and Yeser Oz. Leadership was supposed to come for you. Priesthood was coming for him. But since you were too quick to use your hands, you're not going to get that. That's all Esav type of activities that he was struggling with and not perfecting. Shimon and Levi, they sure know how to use their hands. In next week's Parsha, they kill out the whole city of Shechem. That's the kind of thing Esav would do. Still, it needs to be perfected. Yaakov has had certain complaints against it, but that's the kind. And what do you know about Yehuda? Yehuda is blessed as a lion coming from David, King David from Yehuda. And what did he do? He killed Philistines. So you see that you start going through the children of Leah. These are the Esuvian-like children that were key on Sur Meirah. Stay away from evil. They were using the hands, using these kinds of things. That's what Yaakov blesses Yehuda. His hand should be against his enemy. And that's what King David did. So at the end of the day, he was taking on a mission that he never dreamt he really would have to do. Now, how is this relevant for us? First of all, it's a beautiful pshat in all the psukim. But what's most relevant is when a person has to go through very difficult challenges in life, you now have a new perspective on how to look at certain things. A lot of times, we live in a society where I'm sorry to say that the majority of the Jews out there are not doing their missions. There are too many secular Jews who are doing nothing for what they should be doing. These are missions that never in the history of the Jewish people there's so many Jews not doing their mission. Well, what did we learn from this week's Parsha? Well, if they aren't doing it, somebody else is going to have to do it. Who's that going to be? It's the people right around this table. It's the people who understand what Yiddishkeit's all about. And that means we all have to start thinking, and Hashem puts in our laps missions that we weren't anticipating. Sometimes it could be in a small way, sometimes in a big way. But I never was comfortable, I was always comfortable in this type of skin. You're telling me to put on another skin? As simple as asking very religious people to do some kiruv. I can't do that. I was never raised for that. Who cares? Neither was Yaakov. Or about Tshuva has to now start to learn Gemara. I don't know if I could do that. What do you mean? It's your role. You have to do this. There's too many Jews not learning Gemara. Well, I'm uncomfortable. So fine. It's going to be hard. So fine. No one's asking you to marry another woman. No one's asking you to bury somewhere else. Look what your grandparents were able to sacrifice to take on extra roles. So you have to understand that the challenges that we are having, and many of us are having incredibly difficult challenges. And for many of us, we feel like the sun has gone down too early. I'm in the dark. I don't know why I'm going through this. Why is Hashem making me go through these things? This is crazy. I never had this personality. And Hashem is forcing me to take on a new role that I never thought I could ever do. You know what? Because there's other people who are not doing their roles. And if we don't do that, then Mashiach doesn't come. And that's why we're overburdened. Like Yaakov. But at least we could say, but I have his Alta Zaidi who was able to do it. And if he was able to do it, that means I'm able to do it. So we should look at the challenges that we have. And only at the end will Hashem play it all back and say, see why this happened over here, why this happened over here, why this happened over here, and why you couldn't understand why this happened, and why love tricked you over here, why that happened. It was all because you were really developing something you never believed you could develop. And maybe only in the next world will you understand what that is. But now we see this is what happened. Let me close with a very short story. It's beautiful stories, this idea, and we're done. This story took place in Matersdorf in Yerushalayim on Rehov Sorotskin. So a bus is making its way down to the downtown area. It stops in front of one of the Torah institutions. It's about 75 people lined up to get onto this Israeli bus. It's already crowded. So if you've been there, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's this madhouse. So the main thing is just get everybody into the bus, and then what they do is because the bus got to get moving, right? And then they just pass up the tickets, and he punches and they pass it back. So anyway, there's this young little kid, this 8-year-old kid, and that was a really frantic day. So this 8-year-old kid makes his way up to the front of the bus. He goes to the bus driver and says, you forgot to punch my ticket. So there's one of these Israeli bus drivers, it's hot and it's sweating and he's not in the mood to argue with an 8-year-old. He says, listen, just move on. You're blocking people. I punched your ticket already. I punched your ticket. And the kid says, no, you didn't. You didn't punch it. I told you I punched it and I go to the back. Right? So he said, I can't do that. I'd be stealing. You didn't punch. I told you go to the back. So screams at the boy. The boy goes down. Fine. A couple minutes later, the bus driver is looking in the rearview mirror. And he sees the kids crying. So this is typical Israeli bus driver. They can yell and scream at you, but the next minute they got a heart of gold. Well, that's Baruch Hashem. So he calls, he says, come here. What's the matter? Why are you crying? It's because I told you, I'm stealing. If you don't punch my thing, I'm stealing. So the Israeli bus says, give me your card. He punches it and goes, Zeyafeh. That's beautiful. Right? And that's what the Jewish people are. And that's why Hashem listens to Rachel. Because we want to have children that we can say Zeyafeh. And that's the real nachas we're looking for. Hashem should give us the courage to live up to these ideals and have children we could say, V'zeh yafeh.